Hello everybody, Levi Clay here, and I am back again to do another little tutorial video for you on the subject of notating bends in Guitar Pro 6. Now this is an area that can prove slightly confusing if your end goal in terms of your transcription files is to have MIDI replication of the original recording. What I mean by that is there are really two ways that you can transcribe. You can transcribe and write music out the way that it should look on a page, and that might not result in the best MIDI playback in the program, which I don't really see as a problem because I'm about reading the music rather than having a file where I can hit play and copy the sound. If I'm just copying the sound, I might as well, just copy the sound. But I do appreciate that it's a skill that some people do want, and there are plenty of examples whereby you still need to understand how the notation of bends works in Guitar Pro in order to create the best looking score. I'll give you a few examples of that in a second. Anyway, so this video has been brought to you by Ian, who's one of my patrons over on Patreon. Up there. Over on Patreon, and this is because he's transcribing Josh Smith's Drown in My Own Tears. In particular, he was having trouble notating the bend in this bar, so it sounds like this. So there's a bend, a release, and then another bend. Let's just listen to the whole of that intro to that track, and then from there I will break down notation of bends, and then I'll dig into that particular bend. So nice sounding track. So no bends so far. See a bend here. That's the bend that Ian was having trouble with. I imagine that would cause problems. Okay, so let's talk about bend notation. Now, when you input a note into Guitar Pro, if I put, say, the 8th fret on the B string there, let's just have a whole bar, right? You notate bends by hitting the B button. Well, there's two ways of doing it. There's I'll have to look for it because I never use this. Is it in there? Be in there somewhere, I'm sure. There. So you can press this button here to include a bend, or you can use a hotkey, which is the letter B for bend. Perfect. Well designed there, guys. So when I do that, what you're presented with is this graph. Now this graph is interesting because it enables you to actually shape the bend fully. Now we'll come on to this shortly, but essentially you have the length of the note across the top, so the full length of the note, and you can actually control where things move with this dot and also this dot. So let's experiment with this. In the first bar, I'm going to let's cancel that. In the first bar, I'm going to just have the bend notated as written. Now, what this looks like to me is the bend starts at the beginning, it bends up for the first quarter value of the note, and then for the further 3/4, it stays at pitch. So let's do that. I don't like the way that looks. We'll come on to that. In this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that bend right back like that. It will still notate exactly the same. In this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the bend right the way out. And in this one, I'm going to pull the bend right out, but I'm also going to pull the tail end right out. So now technically we've got 4 different bends here, and they all look the same on the page, right? One that looks like that, one that looks like that, one that looks like that, and one that looks like that. Now that sort of highlights the problem with bending notation in Guitar Pro, because they're all notated the same way, and there are better ways to notate each one of these bends. But let's just take a listen to them, make sure they sound different. So they did exactly what I'd expect. In this one, we bend straight up to the note. In this second one, which was that, the note bends incredibly quickly. In this one, the note bends over time. And in the final one, the note stays at pitch and then bends at the end. Okay, so let's move on to the second part of getting these bends to notate how we want them to. So let's readdress this bend. If I want to create this bend, what I would actually do in terms of notation is I would put my 8th fret bend in as such, and then I would move over. I would press L or tie, which you can do up here somewhere, there. And this note is going to last for the rest of the bar. I would then go to this second note, hit the B button again, and I'm indicating hold here. Now what this is going to do is it's going to result in the bend appearing on the first quarter note. It will bend up and then it will be told to hold that note across here. So, and I mean, technically speaking, I'd want to, if I want to really replicate it, I'd do that, that, yeah, like that. So this should sound the same now, and sounds exactly the same, right? This one definitely gives us a better idea of how to play it when we're just reading rather than listening. In the second example, we've got a quick bend, right? So there's a few ways that I could notate that, right? You could do this. You could, we could, for example, put a 16th note in there, a quick bend, a dotted 8th note with a hold on it, and then hold that bend out through the rest of the bar. This is going to sound the same, right? Another way that you might choose to notate that would be, I'd probably choose to do this because it just results in less notes on the paper. I'd use a grace note. I would bend up on the grace note over the length of the grace note and then hold in place there. So again, it just looks better on the page. Sounds exactly the same, but there's more indication of how this bend is to be played. This bar presents, well, no problems at all, because it is the most accurate way to notate that. It is a bend over the full length of the note. So if I want to notate that accurately, I'd put that in. And then finally, we have our bend where the note is static and it bends up at the last quarter. So, shock horror, we're going to put an 8th fret note in for the first 3 beats, and then in the final beat, I'm going to then bend that up over the length of the note. So again, that should sound the same. Same thing, right? So there's a few things to compare. This bar should be the same as this bar. This bar should be the same as this bar. This bar should be the same as this bar, and this bar should be the same as this bar. This gives you an idea of how notating bends in Guitar Pro is really about understanding how the MIDI works and how these graphs work, and working on interpreting all of these things. The place where things become difficult, and it's not really difficult, is when you have bends and releases and things like that. So in the example presented by Ian, which was, I want to say, that bar. If I actually break that down to 4 beats, the bend happens in beat 3, right? So it's like we've got 2 8th notes there. The first note is bent and released onto the second 8th note, and then that note is bent again. So if I want to include this, I would just notate it exactly as that. So there's my, it may just be one note here, but up here we have an 8th note, a further 8th note, and then a quarter note. So I could actually go onto my first 8th note, put a bend and release, and I'm going to bring it down to a half, and then drag this out all the way to the end. So then over that 8th note, the note is going to bend up to the half and then release over time. And currently, because there's no indication of any other MIDI information on these second notes, it will just do that over the entire bend, so over the entire note value, so you'd have this. So actually, is that a whole tone, whole step? So that's not right, obviously. What we want to do is then go to the second note, because this isn't a bend and release, and this one bends up to that note over time, and this note holds. And it's actually just an 8th note there. So an accurate way to notate that bend would be like that. Hopefully that makes some sense. Now, when you really start digging into bending notation, things can get quite complicated, but the understanding of individual notes and thinking of assigning a MIDI command or a bend command to each note, and then thinking, well, what do I want this note to actually do? Should this note be held? Does the note release on this note? And here's a tricky one. Does the note start releasing on this note, or does it finish releasing on this note? A lick that I often have to notate looks like this. You'll have a bend on a note, and I hate it when you have to do that, but let's say something like that. The problem comes in the, well, I've actually notated it correctly. I'm able to have this release in place on the first 16th note, which will mean that the bend will start on the first 8th note, it will hold across this, it will start releasing on this 16th note, it will be released on this 16th note, and then from that note it pulls off to this note. So, and it looks tidy on the page. If you don't do things that way, if you remove this note and have an 8th note there, then you have this messy notation whereby the bend, the released bend and the note that you're pulling off to are on the same beat. And I hate the way that looks, so I don't do it. What am I doing? What's this? Oh, what the hell has happened here? I mean, for some reason that's not looking right at all. Let's just write that out quickly again. Doesn't take me long to write. So 16th note pulling off there. Put my pull off in now. And because I'm able to think like this, it means that I can go in and add my bends at the end. Why do I keep hitting the wrong button there? Let's put release on that one. I just think this first bar looks better than the second bar. I don't know why. There's maybe that's on my screen. That's really not on my screen. Yeah, that's looking a bit odd there with this 5. But that's how I would prefer that to look. So it's just understanding of those little things and how these bends are best notated. Another tip for you, and I think I talked about this in a previous lesson. Let's just do that. So for a lick like this, where you want bends on the 5th frets, you might do this. The problem with that as an approach is the notation of the bend. It's bending immediately up a quarter tone. Even though it's over the length of the note, the point is a fraction of a second into the note is actually out of tune. And if we actually take a look at how that sounds when we apply it to a single note, it doesn't sound good, look. That's not what a blues curl is. A blues curl would keep the note at pitch until the end, so this. And when you start including that, you can hear the flick at the end, and that's a lot more representative of how a blues curl should sound. So to my ears, sounds a lot better than if I were to note that same thing with the bends like that. Tiny little attention to detail thing, but it's the understanding of that that really starts to help your stuff come alive. So that's all I'm going to demonstrate today. It's just like a basic tutorial on this stuff, and that's how you need to be thinking about these bends. Obviously there's a lot more advanced stuff that we can do with this, pertaining to pre-bends, bends, pre-bends and releases and things like that. Though to be fair, if you've got my Hellcat Molly album transcriptions, you'll be able to see in the guitar profiles there how I've notated some of the more complicated bending ideas. But there's definitely some fun stuff for you to work on there. So I hope you have enjoyed that. If you have, please do check out my Patreon, link to that below. Get exclusive access to my Facebook group where we talk about stuff like this all day long, like the rather nerdy people that we are. And if you're not interested in my Patreon, again, that's absolutely fine. You can check out my music, or you can just hit the subscribe button. That also helps. Tell people about my videos. I do appreciate it. Thanks very much, guys, and I will see you again for another tutorial video like this soon. Bye.